We are broadcasting.
Woohoo.
Yeah, you see the participants are coming online now.
Okay, I don't see it, but,
On the bottom of my screen, yeah. The field is
oh,
populated.
they're down there. Okay.
Yep.
Oh,
Already good luck is coming in,
yeah,
Karen.
thank you. Yeah, just let me know when I should share my screen then.
Likely when I
You'll cue me?
unshare.
Okay,
You can see my hand.
nope. I'm gonna
You
move
can't
mine around.
You can't see me.
Oh, I can see you. I thought you meant like a raise hand. Okay, yeah.
No.
Okay.
I'll just go like that.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, we're up to 20 participants online now.
We had 48 when I signed on.
Correct. I double checked too. Oh, there's Dan.
Aw, hi, Dan. Hi, Marlene.
Two-minute warning.
Thank you. Well, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our next club learning webinar. This one titled Strategic Planning 101. I have a few housekeeping items before I introduce tonight's speaker. So you are on a Zoom webinar platform. This means that you should see from time to time and hear from three of us tonight, Brian, Karen, and myself, who are hosting tonight's webinar. I would ask that if you have any questions for our presenter, please use the Q&A button at the lower part of your screen. And my co-host, Brian Callahan from the Rotary Club of Canmore, he will be monitoring it. And we've selected some intervals during Karen's presentation that will allow an opportunity to respond to those questions. We won't guarantee, depending on how many we get, whether we'll get to them all, but we will certainly respond after the fact because we record the Q&A. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Karen Blewett. Karen has been actively involved in Rotary for over 14 years. During this time, she has taken on numerous roles in Rotary, including website manager, newsletter editor, international director, community service director, district world community service, and club president. Karen has recently joined the Rotary District 5360 Learning and Development team as our strategic planning lead, and I'm happy to have her on the team. If that's not keeping her busy enough, she's also in the process of starting up a new Rotary Club out of Medicine Hat. As a community development officer with Alberta Culture, Multiculturalism, and Status of Women, Karen works with community groups and nonprofit organizations in the area of board governance, strategic planning, leadership, collaboration, fund development, and other community development topics. Over the years, Karen has facilitated numerous planning workshops for Rotary clubs and has presented at both Rotary and Kiwanis district events on the topics of leadership, membership, and Rotary impact. Karen holds a Master of Science degree in Community Development, Bachelor of Arts in Sociology, and a diploma in Nonprofit Management. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Karen Blewett. Karen.
Thank you, Rick. And welcome everyone to the Strategic Planning Workshop. I'm just going to make sure everybody can see my presentation. So Rick, you might just want to give me a thumbs up. It's all good. I'm really excited to be here tonight to present on strategic planning. So welcome everyone to our evening. So first of all, I'd like to just give a little overview of what the presentation will entail this evening and some of the key points that we're going to cover. So first of all, we're going to have a chance to talk about what is strategic planning and why is it important. And then we'll kind of dive into the strategic planning process and some of the different things that our Rotary Club either is or could be doing in terms of looking at strategic planning. And there's 5 different stages that we'll have a chance to talk about through the process. And then next we'll have an opportunity for clubs to have a chance to think about how can we get involved in planning at our individual club level, what kind of resources are out there for us at the district level, and how can we move our strategic plans forward. And last but not least is resources and information. And at the end of the slideshow or the slide deck here, there's a few resources for Rotarians and Rotary clubs to look at. And also the district learning committee, we're going to be adding or enhancing some of the strategic planning resources we have. So stay tuned in the coming months as there's lots of information and tools, worksheets and resources and handouts that we'll be able to share with Rotary clubs so that you can either do the strategic planning with support of the district, or you can do some of your own strategic planning on your own and get the resources from the district and other Rotarians and Rotary clubs across our area. So that's basically the presentation in a nutshell. And so what I'd like to do now actually is to give Rick a cue for our first poll that I'd like to get a sense from Rotarians where we're at in terms of strategic planning. So the question is how familiar are you with strategic planning? So we're going to take just one quick minute for Rotarians to answer this question, and just pick the one that suits you best. We'll see the results.
Mhm.
That's been about a minute, Rick? I don't know.
55 seconds, close
Oh,
enough.
okay. Well, pretty close.
There you go.
Just showing our result. Oh, there we go.
There it is. Yep.
Okay, so it's always interesting to kind of get a sense or a feel of where Rotarians are at. So we've got quite a few, actually the majority of us are somewhat familiar with strategic planning. And there's a few that have been doing it a long time. And there's, I don't know, at least one person out there that is a seasoned guru. So they might have to put up their hand a little later so we can pick their brain as well. So that's great. I'm actually a little bit surprised that there isn't any that it's all new to. So that's great. And but we'll see how we go as we go through the process. We'll ask a few other questions. And so hopefully, Rick, we can keep that for later too. It'll be good little information for us to have in terms of where our clubs are at. So the first section of the presentation here is really to get into defining what strategic planning is and why it's important. And then, as I mentioned, the phases of strategic planning. So in a nutshell, really, strategic planning is a roadmap or a future-oriented roadmap of where we're at and where we want to be in the long term. So as you can see from this diagram or this image, it shows where are we at now at the bottom there with the circle. And then at the top, it's where do we want to be in the long term. So that long-term plan is our strategic plan. The where are we going is our strategic part. And then when you see it circling back down, how do we actually get there? That gets into the business plan, or in our Rotary clubs, we often use action plans in terms of how do we actually get to where we're going and where we want to be. So this is just a nice little visual graphic to show what strategic planning is in the very broadest sense. In terms of audience for a strategic plan, it can be anybody that has an interest in the strategic plan. So as we get into the slideshow here a little bit further, we'll talk about some of the different audiences for our strategic plan, but it can definitely range. It's not always just our board and membership. It can also be our community and partners and stakeholders. It could be funders and the community as a whole. There's all kinds of different stakeholders that may have an interest in our strategic plan and what we're doing as a Rotary Club. So we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit. So here is the next step is the benefits of strategic planning. And, you know, I've been doing this for a long time. And so I kind of geek out on this kind of stuff. I understand that some people, and let's just admit it, some people might moan and groan a little bit about strategic planning. But, you know, if we have a positive attitude and look at different ways we can engage in strategic planning, there's actually quite a few benefits for us. And when done rightly and when we have a good commitment from our Rotary Club, it really has a lot of long-lasting benefits. So the first one is really to think about how we can involve people to get a better understanding of what our club is doing and the work that we're working on. So that's one of the first steps of a benefit for strategic planning. The second one is all of those elements of strategic planning, our vision, mission, and our goals All of those things help us to improve our decision making and also allocate our resources. So how do we allocate our people power? So as Rotarians, we're all volunteers, and a strategic plan can really help us align some of those things. Same as our fundraising dollars or how we actually disperse our funds when we fundraise. So a strategic plan can help us organize our thoughts around that. And of course, it helps us to build that common purpose together as a club and kind of have that whole club coordination aspect. And the last piece that I think is really critical, and we don't have time to dive into it too much tonight, is how strategic planning can really help us identify our key messages, our Rotary brand, and sort of promoting ourselves in Rotary, and that value proposition in terms of why Rotary and how do we make a difference in our local clubs as well as around the world. And it's something we should all be proud of in Rotary. And so I think strategic planning can really help us build a plan that then helps us clarify some of those key messages that we have in our clubs and across the district and around the world. Also, strategic planning is helpful to align different things in Rotary. So it gives us an opportunity to make linkages between our current club strategic plan and then how it aligns with what we're doing at the district level and at the Rotary International level. So how do they all kind of feed into each other, our different plans? So that's one value and benefit in terms of strategic planning. The next one is a linking to the Rotary International, the My Rotary goals. So this is a little plug for Rotarians to attend the December club learning webinar, where Linda will be talking and helping clubs work through those annual goals. So that's another benefit of doing strategic planning in terms of being able to link then to some of those other Rotary goals and action steps that we're doing in Rotary, and how do we make those connections. And lastly, I actually think there's an opportunity for us to make more connections and collaborate across our Rotary clubs and the district. I think the more we have similarities and commonalities, our like priorities as Rotary clubs, I think it creates more opportunities for us to work together. So maybe we can share our strategic plans or just some of the key priorities that we have in our clubs, and we might realize there are other ones out there doing very similar things. So how can we learn and share and grow together? And so this next slide kind of breaks it down into some different audiences. This isn't all of the audiences necessarily, but it kind of gives us an idea in terms of why bother with strategic planning. So first is the community. And I think this is becoming more and more common, not to say that the whole community wants to see our detailed strategic plan, but wanted to get an essence or an idea of what is Rotary, why are you doing it, and what are you focusing on? So it gives them kind of an opportunity to understand what the club is doing and the commitment that the club has for what it says it's going to do. And also gives communities a way to see how they can get involved in terms of like, oh, I didn't know Rotary did that. Or really, Rotary's focusing on this? Oh, cool, I didn't know that either. So there might be opportunities for the community to be more engaged in what we do in Rotary. The next one is our board. So our board of directors, of course, is helping guide the organization as a board of directors does. And one of the key things to that is being proactive versus reactive. So strategic planning helps us to really create that roadmap of where we want to go and how we're going to get there, and be proactive and not just reactive to what's going on around us. And of course, bringing again that common purpose theme kind of comes across all of those different audiences that we have. The next one is our club committees. So I think it also helps committees if there's commonality and common themes across the club in terms of the strategic plan, to then be able to look at our budgets and our work plans and how do those committees align with what the club is doing. And that gives the committees sort of that guidance and direction for moving forward. And then lastly is partners and stakeholders. Again, similar to the community overall, getting that consistent message in terms of what the club is doing, and then also maybe where there's some synergies or opportunities to actually partner because you have similar goals or a similar mission in terms of what your partners want to do. So that kind of gives you a quick overview of how the different stakeholders or different Rotary partners and people involved in Rotary can be involved. And this next slide, I wanted to just mention because there's, in this slide, I guess it's phases that we call it for strategic planning, and there's 7 of them. And I put a little arrow beside number 2 because I think we're pretty good in Rotary at developing content or having conversations and discussions and you know, sort of brainstorming and thinking of different things that we can do, and you know, surveying and doing those different things. Where we sometimes struggle is, okay, so how do we move that strategic plan from all the brainstorming and ideas and then organize it into a plan and write it out? Who actually writes it in a Rotary Club? Who writes the strategic plan? And then the communication piece. What do we communicate and to who? Does everybody need to see the same stuff, or do we communicate different aspects of our strategic plan? And then where the rubber hits the road is how do we actually implement it? And so in Medicine Hat, the Rotary Club of Medicine Hat, we did create some action plans over the years. And that was one way to do it, but it wasn't always an easy thing because it's also, well, who does that? Is it the board? Is it the committees? Is it the whole membership? How do we actually, like, what does implementation look like in a strategic plan? And then the last 2 pieces on the phases of strategic planning are things that often get overlooked, and that is monitoring or evaluation. So how do we actually know we're successful in Rotary? How do we know our strategic plan is carrying out what it said it's going to do? How do we measure that success? And then lastly, the celebration piece. And I think in Rotary especially, we've been kind of shy to even showcase all the awesome things that we do in Rotary over the years and decades. And maybe this is something that Rotarians can work on and actually showcasing it. It doesn't mean to be only bragging. It means that there's lots of great things that we can celebrate and showcase together of what Rotary does. So I think those are the other phases of strategic planning that sometimes aren't always met. And as a result, maybe sometimes collect dust on the shelf. And we'll talk about collecting dust on the shelf in a little bit. So I think this is one of the cues for the Q&A, Brian, if there's any questions that anybody has so far before we get to the next section.
Karen, there's one up here. It says it might be helpful to include some of the limitations of strategic planning if possible. Could you kind of ruminate on that for a little bit? What it can't do for you?
Well, it can't solve all of the organization's challenges and do everything. It's intended to be more of a guiding document, a living document, than it is a step-by-step silver bullet to solve all of our Rotary challenges that we have or things like that. So I think if people go into strategic planning with the mindset that it's a tool to help guide us move forward, I think that will help. There's of course always limitations in terms of anything that we do, and strategic planning. I mean, I can share some of the pitfalls I've seen with organizations over the years, but some of it, as I mentioned just in the previous slide, I think some of those challenges are that we don't move past the content and talking about it. And one of the things I've seen in some organizations is that we don't know how to get all of the brainstormed ideas and then really narrow it down into the priorities. And I've seen that happen in some organizations. And I actually do like to have a priority conversation with organizations because the brainstorming piece can be great and lots of creativity and ideas come out of it, but you have to then narrow it down and figure out what's realistic and timely for your organization. I've got lots of good questions to probe Rotary clubs on that. So if anybody wants a resource after, let me know. You have to remind me though, because I will forget. So you'd have to say, hey, you said there's a resource on this and I can send it to you.
Karen, there are no other questions in the Q&A. So if you want to proceed, please do so.
Okay, thank you. So the strategic planning process, these are the 5 circles here are kind of the different stages or phases that you can go through in strategic planning. And I'll just quickly whip through them on this slide, and then we'll have a chance to kind of unpack each of them a little bit more. But the first one is our foundation. So those are things like the background of our organization, our vision, mission, and values. And then the environmental scan is things looking at what's working well in our organization and what are some of the challenges, so internal and external pressures. And then the next piece is goals and objectives. So what is it that we're trying to achieve as a Rotary Club? And then the strategies and action are getting into the how piece and how are we actually going to implement our strategic plan. And then last, of course, but not least, is that evaluation piece and how do we measure our success? How do we showcase our accountability and things like that? And again, as I mentioned before, ideally, strategic planning is intended to be a living document. So there's ways that clubs and organizations can integrate strategic planning into more of an ongoing part of what you do in your Rotary Club, as opposed to doing it once every 3 to 5 years or something like that. There's ways to kind of engage that dialogue ongoing. And there's a few tips later on that as well.
Excuse me, Karen.
Yeah.
You want to do our second poll now?
Oh, good. Yes, sure. I think that was the first one. Okay.
It's not moving.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, it's not going to the second one?
No, it's not.
That's okay. Well, maybe we can figure it out. Maybe you have to submit the first one before the second one. I'm not sure
Carry on. Sorry.
how that works. Okay, no worries. We'll move on. So in terms of the strategic planning process, the foundational elements, two of the key things for that are our vision and mission. So just to give a big 30,000 level look at it, the vision is really the future direction of where we want to be as an organization. So what are we striving for in the long term? It's that snapshot of the future, 5, 10, 20 years out. It should
Sorry,
be
Karen.
ideal. Oh, we found it?
Sorry. Yeah, I found it. I missed something
Okay.
here. So I'm going to launch the poll, okay?
Okay, no worries.
Mm-hmm. About 10 seconds to go. There we go. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so where's your club at with strategic planning? So it looks like, again, we have quite a few that said we do have a strategic plan and we review it regularly. Some are, I think we have a strategic plan, or we did a strategic plan a few years ago. And then some aren't sure if we have a strategic plan, and some do have plans collecting dust on a shelf. And that's okay. That's totally okay, because it happens. And hopefully after this session, we'll at least get some thinking going in terms of, okay, so how can we help avoid that from happening and engage in a process that leads us to keep reviewing our strategic planning on an ongoing basis. So that's good to know. Interesting that none have never done it before. So that's good that we have lots of Rotarians that are somewhat familiar with strategic planning, and that's good. Thank you. So thanks for that, Rick. Okay, so back to the foundational elements of strategic planning. The vision, as I mentioned, is that snapshot of the future and an ideal state that we hope we can get to in the long term. but also realistic. And it's a bit of a stretch goal, sort of a long-term stretch goal. And more what I'm seeing in terms of how things are evolving in the language and even in strategic planning is making it much more easy to communicate. So sometimes we'll see organizations that have a really long, paragraph. And the joke used to be if you can fit it on your t-shirt and not in a size 8 font, thumbs up, then you have a good vision statement, because it's easy enough for people to remember, or it resonates with people. It instills some kind of an emotional reaction to it. So that might be a little tip on putting it on your t-shirt. In terms of the mission, that is the purpose of the organization, or what is the business that we're doing. This is also something that is becoming more common and important for organizations to look at. So maybe beyond just having a vision and mission statement, but really looking at what is it that we do, and that key part of why do we do it. And so it's that value proposition. So for some of you that have maybe seen some business canvas models and some of these other kind of new techniques out there, organizations are really looking at building that value proposition in terms of why others want to be involved. So why would others want to be involved in Rotary? And so it gets us thinking a little bit more than just what we do in Rotary, but why we do it. And so those other 2 points there kind of talk to that: inspiring people to act, give, join, or serve with us, and instilling that emotional and rational impact that we're trying to achieve. So these questions, and I won't go through all of them, but these are some of the probing questions that I've done with different Rotary groups, and kind of getting us to think about it personally. What does Rotary mean to me? And then looking at it through a lens of like, what makes our club awesome? Like, why am I in Rotary? And what does Rotary have to offer? And so sometimes you get really good conversations out of that, as opposed to just saying, well, what is our vision and mission? So a lot of times it's in how we frame those questions. And so I just wanted to share a couple of questions with you on that. And I can also give these to you after in some of the worksheet formats that I've done with clubs as well. The last one is also very important, is why is our club needed or important? That's that value piece. Why Rotary? The next one here is environmental scanning, or eScan, and basically looking at what the organization is doing on an ongoing basis, and both internally and externally. So these are just different tools and techniques that I just copied on there. So a lot of us in Rotary are quite familiar with things like the SWOT analysis: strength, weakness, opportunities, and threats. There's other ones out there like the PEST analysis, or PESTLE analysis, which adds legal and environmental. There's the SOAR, which some institutes like colleges and universities have used. And then there's the wave trends analysis, which is a way to kind of look at what's kind of new and on the new end and emerging, and then what are some of the trends and things that are on the way out. So this is a good exercise even for Rotary to think about, how are things evolving in Rotary as we move along. So these are just examples of different things that clubs can look at to do an environmental scan. I won't go through all of these questions. This is more as a resource for you after. You will get a copy of the PowerPoint presentation, so you can have a chance to go through it individually as a Rotarian, or if you want to take some of these questions to your club. But this kind of is some of the questions that I've used before too with Rotary clubs, looking at doing more of a traditional SWOT analysis and kind of thinking about what works well in our Rotary Club, what are our assets, what are some of those positive things that we do, what do members say is great about our Rotary Club, and then on the flip side are some of those challenges and some of the issues that we face, and then externally are those opportunities that we can take advantage of and look at some of those trends, as well as the external threats. And we all know the pandemic is one of those external things we don't have control over, but we do have to adapt to it. So there's some good questions around that as clubs. The next one is the goals and strategies are the kind of the main ones, in terms of the goals being, okay, what is it that we're trying to achieve, the what? And as you can see here, from in general, because there's lots of jargon and language around strategic planning, and it really depends on how you as a club want to use that language and that kind of a thing. It's just really important that we're consistent so everybody knows what it is. And so in general, in strategic planning, the goals are quite broad and general and more strategic. So they don't necessarily change every year. They're sort of that 3 to 5 year strategic direction. And then the objectives are more of that SMART stuff, which is, you know, the specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and timely things. And then the strategies and actions are the how. So how do we actually get these, how do we achieve these goals? And strategies, again, are more broader approaches on how we do that. And then the actions are, of course, the action steps or the tactics and activities that we use to achieve our goals. So again, I just gave each slide, after each slide, I kind of just give some examples of some of the different questions that, you know, I've used with Rotary clubs in terms of establishing those goals. And so the first one there is, what does our Rotary Club need to do in order to achieve our mission or vision? It can be your vision as well. You know, where do we want to focus our efforts as a Rotary Club? Where do we really want to focus? And then another way of framing it is kind of what are those big strategic priorities that we want to look at as a Rotary Club? And so it just helps us address, you know, the things that we identify in our SWOT analysis, and it helps us make sure that we stay, you know, relevant and sustainable, having those goals. Now, this is just a sample of, the intent is not for you to see the minute details, because I recognize that it's probably like a size 3 font on your computer screen. But the intent was just to show you that there are templates out there, of course, that we have even in Rotary that we can use. So I can send you the template that I did when I created this for our Rotary Club, the Rotary Club of Medicine hat. It kind of just gives you that broader sense. What is the strategic direction of the Rotary Club? You know, what are some of the key priorities? And then in this case, we had 4 goals. And what are those 4 broad goals? And then some of the strategies underneath. So that just gives you a sample of the template of what part of a strategic plan looks like, or could look like, if you wanted to use that as a resource. And then lastly, the last part of the strategic planning process is the measuring. And this is, again, looking at measuring the what and the how, you know, so what is success going to look like? And what do we want to measure, as well as, are we actually measuring the right stuff? And then also looking at measuring the why. And this one isn't always easy to do, but it also really ties into this bigger emphasis in Rotary right now of showing that Rotary impact and how do we make a difference in Rotary. And so it helps us also identify why our community projects are needed. So we did something like this in the Rotary Club of Medicine hat. We did a Rotary impact assessment, and the intent was to look at more, not just what are those awesome Rotary programs that we do, how we impact youth, how we, you know, some of the legacy projects that we have in Rotary. It's not just what we do in Rotary, but the why. And looks like there's a poll coming up. So go ahead and answer that poll.
I just got to get the right one here.
Oh, that's okay, because it can come a little later too. We can wait a little bit.
There we go.
Okay.
Karen, if I may, people are asking in the Q&A while they do this. We're being asked here, we do our strategic plan in person, the writer opines. Do you have a planning process for COVID or Zoom friendly? Can we pull this off on Zoom? And some see the current time as somewhat limiting a club's ability to come together to do this kind of fundamental work. Would you offer us kind of an overview of that, please?
That's a great question. And the answer I would say is yes. And I think we're able to pivot in Rotary Online. And actually, we, in my day job too, we've been doing strategic planning sessions online, some of it 100% on Zoom, as well as other platforms. And I'm starting to get excited talking about this, but I'll try not to digress, but there are actually some really cool ways that we can engage. It doesn't replace in person for sure. And of course that is ideal, but there are some ways that we can engage in Rotary and use like online collaboration tools to actually complement Zoom and things like that, where we can do planning processes online, whether it's, you know, with breakout rooms and we can do multi club kind of sessions and then break people out into their individual clubs. We can work with individual clubs and help facilitate a strategic planning session via Zoom. And we just have to, you know, be willing to adapt a little bit and understand that, you know, we also probably won't be able, at least I know I can't stay concentrating for, you know, I can't concentrate for 8 hours on a Zoom call. So some of our sessions might be, you know, shorter, and you might have more of them. So you might do a couple hours here and there, or an hour and a half here and there on strategic planning via Zoom, but it can definitely be done. And I would be actually really excited if Rotary clubs want to give me a shout after on how we can maybe do that.
Okay. Karen, one of our members, Dave Leslie, I'm going to allow him to talk. He's queued up here. If you would take a question from Dave, if you can hear me. His microphone appears to be off.
I have a question, I don't think, Brian.
Well, it's showing up on my panel here, Dave, as you had your hand up. So
Uh-oh, must have
I'm a
touched
good
the
school
wrong
teacher.
button.
Okay. Okay, Karen, stand down.
Sorry about that.
No, it's okay, Dave.
Oh, I better lower that hand.
You can go to the washroom, Dave.
No, where do you, that's where I am. Yeah.
Oh.
Just kidding, just
Too
Oh.
much information.
Yeah.
There you go, Rick. Back to you and your poll.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. So the next poll here is who is or has been involved in strategic planning in your club? So who have you involved in your strategic planning? So the first answer there, we got about 19%. Well, we got 19%. So the club's board. The second one is the membership has been involved. We also had some indicate that our club's committees have been involved in strategic planning. Super interesting that we haven't had the other ones there involved in our district leadership. So having some of our district team members involved in planning, or other Rotary clubs and trying to collaborate and engage other clubs or partners. And also the participants or recipients of Rotary programs, maybe some of the youth that we've sponsored or things like that in our community projects. So that's kind of an interesting answer, and maybe it'll get us, and we're going to get into who do we engage in the process in the next slide. I think I got ahead of myself on that, but that's a really interesting to see where we're at in Rotary clubs. So before we get to that piece, first just wanted to just quickly mention a couple of things on this slide about how do we keep that plan alive and not collect the dust. And so, you know, a couple of the things here that we've kind of mentioned before, and it sounds like a lot of the clubs on this call are already doing, and that is building that plan and doing, you know, the planning together to kind of create that sense of ownership and commitment. And another step would be to doing that annual action plan or an implementation plan. And of course, trying to keep that consistency in terms of the language of how do we do what we have in our strategic plan actually is how we carry out in the community and using that same kind of language. The next one is linking our club activities and reports, or it could be board meetings or committee meetings as well, to our strategic plan. So some organizations and some Rotary clubs have done that even at their board meetings or at membership meetings, in terms of looking at how the work of Rotary is and how does it actually link back to our strat plan. So, you know, so we don't forget about our strategic plan, and we know it's collecting dust somewhere, or we maybe did it a few years ago or whatever, but it kind of keeps the planning alive and on top of mind what some of our either goals or our priorities are as a club. And then the next one is reviewing outcomes or results from the plan. And so some of the things that we've done in some of the clubs that I've worked at with in Medicine Hat and Brooks, and is we did member engagement. So it wasn't only just a planning process and facilitated a session and came up with a vision and goals. It was, how do we keep engaging the members ongoing? You know, so it's sometimes going back to the membership and saying, here's what we talked about, and here's how we all co-created our plan. Maybe this meeting, let's talk about community service projects, because we talked about trying to do more hands-on community service projects. So then you dedicate a lunch meeting just to talk about that. And then a few months later, you pull something else out of the strategic planning conversation that the members talked about, and you kind of say, where are we at with this? And so sort of building that planning into more of the ongoing work that we do in Rotary. So it's not just forgotten and only done, you know, kind of long-term or sporadically. So those are just kind of some examples of different ways that you can keep that plan alive. So the next piece here, and that's kind of going to who's involved in that strategic plan. And this is by no means intended to be prescriptive. It just gives an idea or an example of how we in Rotary can engage different people in the process, in our strategic planning process. So typically, and again, this can be adapted and you may want to do it a little bit differently in your club, but typically it's the board and membership and committees that work together to create that vision for the organization or the club. And then in terms of environmental scanning, or kind of taking a snapshot of where we're at in the community or at a moment in time, this is where we often maybe expand it to our community or expand it to our partners or to, you know, some of the people involved in our programs, our Rotary programs and things like that, is where we might engage a broader community. And then goals and strategies, those things are often done more internally in the club itself, where the board and the members kind of work on some of that big picture strategy stuff, like the goals and strategy, and then the committees might work on some of the action planning and things like that. And then the evaluation piece is also done internally. But the more I was thinking about it, actually, even when I looked at the slide earlier today, was evaluation obviously can also be done externally. So maybe talking to recipients about what they liked about our Rotary Youth Program, or what ideas for improvement they suggest, and kind of getting a sense of doing some of that surveying and evaluation work with those that we actually serve and partner with in the community. That's kind of the who and the when. Now the how piece, and this goes to that question that somebody asked earlier about, you know, can we actually do this strategic planning online? And while it's not ideal, maybe there are definitely ways we can engage in strategic planning online, and whether it's via Zoom or other platforms. So the first piece there is that facilitated conversation. And this is where we can engage in a number of levels of conversations around those key elements of strategic planning. Again, the member engagement, which I mentioned, I gave a couple of quick examples, is how we can engage our members and our club committees for getting their input into the strategic plan. It might not just be the one-time facilitated conversation, there might be sort of ongoing engagement. Same with the community, we might want to kind of get a sense of how the community feels. It could even be of, do you know what Rotary is, or who we are in Rotary? And it might be just getting a little bit of that sense of awareness, or that Rotary brand, and what does that look like? And then of course surveys, and I know Dan's on this call and he's great at the survey thing. And so surveys are another way that we can get a snapshot in terms of getting people's feedback and identifying trends, and then kind of building our plans around that. So maybe here's another chance for, if there's any questions before we move on to the last kind of section of our presentation.
Just a couple of comments from you know, people who are online with us. Christine is mentioning that Martin Harvey is attending or attend quite a few clubs to facilitate strategic planning. And another commentary here, and I think they'd like some feedback from you, Karen. It says, we're working on a strategic action to address COVID-19 over the next 12 to 24 months. The thought is that needs during and out of COVID-19 are going to be different and new. In addition, we adjust to meet the skill sets and the safety of our members during this time. We leave a full plan review post, you know, COVID-19. So looking at that as being the big elephant in the room for all of us, what are your thoughts on that? I know you've said that you're able to do a little bit of this on Zoom, but can you expand on that just a little bit?
Yeah, I think that's critical for us in our Rotary clubs to address that and build it into our planning discussions. So it might not be that it's related to a vision statement or anything like that, but it's critically important and part of our strategic planning process. And also it might help us kind of map out, you know, in the immediate future, like, you know, however you define it there, you know, somebody said 12 to 24 months.
Mm-hmm.
We have to adapt and pivot in terms of our services, our sustainability, our relevance, how we engage our members. All of these kinds of things look different, you know, in the near future than they will potentially down the road. However, in saying that, this current environment may also impact how we do things longer term as well. So I think there's ways we can engage in strategic planning conversations. Some people like to call it strategic thinking. So doing some strategic thinking before strategic planning. And so I think, you know, there's opportunities where we can just have a really good conversation just around some of those key things, Brian, that you brought up, that were mentioned, and how does that impact our Rotary Club, and how do we address it? Some organizations are doing a little bit of sort of scenario planning in terms of, you know, being able to be adaptive and responsive, knowing that there are going to be some changes, but we're not 100% sure on what that looks like. So how do we adapt and prepare for those things? So I think that's critical. And so, you know, we can customize our strategic planning to whatever, you know, Rotary clubs want to do. So if they want to do the traditional stuff, which is mostly what I kind of mentioned in this presentation, that's fine. And it might be a time where we have to review some of those things. It also is an opportunity for us to, like you say, to kind of really focus in on our current environment and build some planning conversations around that. And then it would later on intend or kind of promote or also sort of inform our strategic plan moving forward. So I think, there's opportunity. There's lots of opportunity there. And there's actually lots of resources outside of Rotary. And if anybody wants to send, you know, any of this information, lots of good stuff for nonprofits specifically, because we don't have the same level of, you know, capacity or staff or things like that other organizations do on exactly that. How do we adapt in times of COVID, related to volunteer recruitment and management, related to OH&S, all kinds of different topics and things that are becoming critically important that we maybe at Rotary hadn't thought of, or pretty much anybody hadn't really, you know, thought of as much as quickly as we need to now. So there's definitely some of those things that we could kind of have a customized planning conversation around.
Thank you for that, Karen. The commenter just concluded with, perhaps COVID is giving us the opportunity to think outside the box, which is not a bad thing to do. There are no other questions in the queue, Karen, so I turn it back over to you.
Great, thanks. So in terms of, you know, how can us as clubs get involved, and what are some of the things that we can do? First, I think it's really important for you to discuss this at your club level in terms of, okay, so where are we at? And what do we want to do? Are we starting out new? Are we refreshing our plan? Are we, you know, kind of thinking outside the box and wanting to have some conversations more around COVID specifically? So those are sort of the first things that we need to do as a Rotary Club, and discuss it at that level first. And then after that, we can kind of determine or figure out, okay, so what's the best planning process that would suit us for where we're at and what we want to do. And then think about who needs to be involved in that process. Is this something that we're doing at the membership level, the club level? Is it something that we could even benefit from? Hey, maybe we can all join a Zoom call and learn, you know, from other Rotary clubs, and maybe we can collaborate and brainstorm ways and learn from each other in terms of what others have done to kind of address some of these things. So there's different ways that we can engage in these different processes. It just really, the classic facilitator answer is, it depends. So that's kind of where you might want to start that conversation. And then connect with the district. So we have resources in our district that, you know, on this call, and just, you know, our DG and our past DGs and our AGs. We have lots of, you know, committees and all of those different things that do a lot of great work and have a lot of resources at their fingertips. So then you as a Rotary Club can connect with the district and see how we can support you and kind of help you with your planning, and, you know, maybe flesh out some of those questions that were just brought out in our conversation tonight. And then lastly is the sort of the commitment piece. And I think that's one of the critical things, is to really make that commitment to planning or pre-planning and things like that. And then what does this look like? When do we want to do it? And what does that look like? So that kind of just gets us thinking about preparing for our strategic planning. This next slide here is kind of a table that I drafted. It's very much a draft in terms of, okay, so how can Rotary clubs actually participate in planning? And there's a number of different ways of planning processes. So we've talked about facilitating, you know, individual clubs working together. And right now, I think most of our work will be, at least the foreseeable future, will be online and via Zoom or other online platforms, just due to the nature of where we're at in our pandemic. And so then, if that's the case, how do we, you know, how can we do these different planning processes, and what are some of the topics that we can talk about? So these are just very preliminary, and there's many other ones. You know, we could add COVID in here, and, you know, there might be other things that you and the clubs identify as something very specific. It could be member engagement or volunteer liability, or whatever it might be in your Rotary Club. There could be specific topics that we just have a conversation around. And then the self-guided planning is an opportunity if clubs want to just do this on their own, or if they want to, you know, utilize their own club leaders to engage, or an AG or something like that. They can kind of do self-guided club planning too. It doesn't have to be facilitated necessarily. And depending on how clubs are meeting these days, it's probably a lot of it is still online, and there may be some in person, and in the future, hopefully in the next few months, we'll be seeing more of that, and using kind of more tools and workshops or worksheets and things like that. The multi-club planning engagement thing was an idea that I thought, this would be cool. I don't know what it would look like, but wouldn't it be cool to just even get some of us together who are thought leaders and want to just talk and flesh some of this out, and then be able to take it and apply it back in our clubs, and sort of have some of those rich conversations and on some of these planning topics for Rotary clubs. And there might just be other training opportunities too. And, you know, I mentioned Linda's presenting in early December. So there's that, and there might be other topics that we can do at the district level as well, in terms of helping clubs on their strategic planning. So those are just examples of different ways that we can engage. And I think for now, the format is likely going to be mostly online. Is there any questions on that before there's just a couple more slides.
There's nothing in the queue, Karen, and you're closing in on your final 5 minutes.
Okay, so the last piece is actually just some resources and information. And the first part is sort of the tips on strategic planning. And just as a little bit of a recap, you know, strategic planning is, the broad strategic planning is done every 3 to 5 years when you create that strategic plan. However, it's important to keep the plan alive. So reviewing it at least annually and kind of, you know, diving into some of those topics more intently. You know, spending the adequate time pre-planning. So I think that's an important part of the process as well. So what do we actually want to do here? What's really important for our club? Where is there something critical right now that we need to address? And maybe we start with that in our planning conversation. Then linking our strategic plans to other plans out there. So whether it's the district or Rotary International, or even maybe some of what's going on in our community, how does our strategic plan align with some of those things? Mentioned monitoring and evaluation quite a bit, and communicating and celebrating our achievements or accomplishments are some of those key tips for strategic planning. And since I used the Rotary Club of Medicine Hat strat plan from before, I'll use it again. And this is sort of a title page, and then the table of contents in terms of what we included in our longer or I should say full strategic plan. What were the table of contents there? And here, these are some strategic plan one pages. So the one on the left is Rotary International's strategic plan kind of overview in terms of their strategic goals. And then a little bit of a description on that with some nice visuals. And then again, the Rotary Club of Medicine Hat, what we did is we created a strategic plan snapshot, and we did this every year to kind of, the goal areas stayed the same, but our priorities changed. So as an example, the COVID thing in today's day and age might be something that we focus on in terms of, you know, being more adaptive and responsive and adapting to some different things. So the strategic priorities might change on an annual basis, but the overall goals of the club remain consistent. Yeah, and so here are some resources for you that many of you clubs probably have already seen. Our district has a lot of great resources. And now that I think about it right now, I forgot to put the People of Action website up here, but that's another great place for resources and a speaker bureau and things like that. But there is a direct link to our districts, has some strategic planning resources already. So I encourage Rotarians to check that out if you haven't had a chance. The My Rotary website also has a strategic planning guide and some worksheets and things like that in there that Rotary clubs can use. I sent one website that I've used a number of times in planning and board governance and things like that, and it's the managementhelp.org. They have lots of great, just general resources on strategic planning. And then the last one is a strategic planning checklist. And I have some other ones too that are, you know, sort of in a PDF format. And then last but not least, I wanted to mention that I have tons, as I do this in my day job, I have tons of other resources on e-scans and visioning and missions and COVID related things to planning and evaluation and all those kinds of topics. So if people want to see any of those other resources, feel free to give me a shout anytime. So just to kind of recap what we chatted about today, if I had more time, I would give you a Jeopardy quiz and kind of salute Alec Trebek and his great legacy. And so basically we chatted about, okay, what is strategic planning and why do we do it? Why is it important? Then the strategic planning process, some of the different stages that we go through and how Rotary clubs might want to ask themselves some questions around that. Then how clubs can get involved in planning. And then last year, for the last couple of minutes, we chatted just briefly on some resources and tips and information. So with that, that's a wrap. So I don't know if we have time for questions, but if we do, feel free to shoot away.
Well, I look in the Q&A section, Karen, and they're more accolades than questions.
Aw,
So
that's sweet.
there you go. You know, Rotarians, as we always say, it's never boastful if you've actually done it. So well done, Rick. I turn it over to you for closure.
Thanks, Brian, and thank you, Karen. I really want to thank you for what I found an incredible presentation. I've worked with strategic planning over the years and in a number of organizations, and I can tell you this has been the clearest snapshot I've ever had of strategic planning. So I hope everyone else found that the information you shared this evening was valuable, and that perhaps there's maybe one thing that you could take home with you, and well, I guess you are home, but take back to your clubs as a way of moving forward. So thank you, Karen. Just a reminder for everyone here on the session tonight, you will receive probably over the next day or so a PDF copy of Karen's complete slide deck. And as well, the entire video recording will be uploaded onto our district YouTube channel probably early next week. The easiest way to get to that is to go to our district club runner webpage, to the home page, and down in the lower right hand corner you'll see some of our social media buttons down there. Hit the YouTube one and that'll take you to a number of areas that you can look for, but look for Club Learning webinars. Finally, I'd also like to thank Brian for helping me out here, co-hosting this evening and handling the questions and keeping us on time and moving forward. And finally, I want to thank everybody here that's participated, that took an hour out of their life to sit with us and learn. And, you know, we're on a journey here in our district. Opportunities to never, I'm a strong advocate of lifelong learning. And I think, I hope many of us are as well. By the way, it's already been mentioned, but our next Club Learning webinar is on December the 2nd. And this one is being delivered or presented by Linda Morris from the Rotary Club of Calgary Fish Creek.
Mhm.
She's going to talk about the importance of goal setting. So thank you, everybody, and good night.
Thank you.